The Path, Part 3, written and illustrated by Jennifer Ann Long. Then one day, while looking out the window at the snow, a bright red cardinal caught Addison Ann's attention. From a pile of seeds spread on top of the snow to a branch in a tree outside her window, Addison Ann watched the cardinal's ascension. Addison Ann became transfixed, watching the cardinal out her window. The bird let out a chirp, and in flew his mate. And what happened next? Some may call it fate. For as the cardinals sat there together, side by side on the same branch, just like that, the answer to the problem hit Addison Ann like an avalanche. For on the same branch that the cardinals did sit hung a wind chime that sparkled in the sunlight and danced in the breeze, playing its beautiful music high in the tree. Atticus Aries made his path on the solid ground with stones. The stones he thought would always lead the way because his path was solid and grounded and well thought out. So Atticus Aries formed his initial path with very little doubt. Well, Addison Ann initially took a different approach to form her path. She buried vines down deep in the solid soil, thinking the ground would anchor the roots from below and the flowers would decorate their path above the forest floor. The reason that both of their paths failed is they forgot to account for what Mother Nature had in store. And in that moment, staring out her window, Addison Ann formulated a plan one she knew would stand the test of time. She gathered pieces of twine, twigs, old tin cans, rocks, crystal, glitter, and beads, and began making a homemade wind chime. The first wind chime was tough to make. She almost gave up halfway through, but her memories of their joyful days in the meadow gave her strength anew. And before Addison Ann realized it, she hadn't made one. She had already completed two. After the glue dried on the first two wind chimes, Addison Ann took them to Atticus Aries' door and knocked one more time. This time, when Atticus Aries opened the door, he wasn't nearly as angry as he had been previously. He did, however, stare at Addison Ann quite quizzically because he didn't understand why she was holding homemade wind chimes immediately. Addison Ann, Atticus Aries began, I'm really quite busy, but I must ask, what are you doing with those wind chimes? Addison Ann drew in a deep breath, and with all the courage she had, she said, please, just hear me out one more time. And do you know what? Even though he hadn't wanted to talk about the meadow for months, Atticus Aries, he did. His thoughts, feelings, and emotions he no longer hid. He listened intently as Addison Ann explained why their paths had failed initially, and then again while she explained how the wind chimes would aid them very beneficially. For both their paths were solid and rooted firmly in the ground, when they should have been being guided more by their senses, especially their sense of sound. For on that very day, they lost their way. If they had only paid more attention, Mother Nature may not have won that round. For they had heard the crunching of the leaves under their feet. They heard the wind howling and the game birds and crows all calling out their warning. And if they'd only listened to the clues that were all around them, they may not have had to go through such a period of mourning. For both Atticus Aries and Addison Ann had thought themselves quite clever. They had thought the stones and vines were enough to mark their way forever. Both of the paths were well rooted. Neither ever thought their path would be disputed. But as Addison Ann looked out her bedroom window that cold winter day at the cardinal perched on a branch, her mind began turning. And before too long, there was a newfound desire deep in her chest burning. Because it was in that moment that Addison Ann remembered what it was that had first led her to the meadow that fateful day. It was her desire to run, to twirl, to frolic, and to play. It wasn't stones laying along a well-worn path or vines strategically placed at a base of a tree. It was the hummingbird in flight. It was Addison Ann's need to feel free. And it was in that moment that she saw the dancing of the wind chime in the breeze. "Don't you see?" Addison Ann began. She had so much to say, the weight of all the words made her feel as if she could no longer stand. As Addison Ann sank to the ground, all her words spilled out at once. Addison Ann wondered if her words made sense, or if she sounded like a dunce. Addison Ann tripped over her words. She kept starting and stopping. She got ahead of herself. She would have to stop and remember to breathe. Addison Ann was quite unsure if she was explaining her epiphany in the right way. For Addison Ann didn't know how to put feelings and emotions into words. It was in that moment that Atticus Aries put his hand on Addison Ann's shoulder and said, "Go back to the part about the birds." It was then that Addison Ann rose to her feet, drew in a deep breath, and tried to explain the birds as concisely as she could. "It was initially a hummingbird that led me to the meadow without so much as a path through the woods. And on that day in late fall, when our path became covered completely, it was the calling of the game birds and crows who hollered out their warning that hurried us home so fleetly. Then just this morning, as I stared out my window, thinking about our days in the meadow bittersweetly, a cardinal and his mate perched in the pine tree, and they sang so sweetly. And as they chirped away, deep in conversation with each other, it seemed, the wind started blowing, causing the branch upon which they were perched to start to swing. And as the branch swung and danced in the cold February air, the sunlight glistened onto the wind chime, dancing and singing in the tree, right there. And it was then that it hit me what it is we need to do. It hit me like a bolt out of the blue. We need to look to the sky to be led, not to be fixed to a path on the ground. If we hang wind chimes in the tree, we'll be able to go to the meadow year-round. For wind chimes will dance in the breeze and act as a beacon. They will lead us on our way, no matter what the season," Atticus Aries added as he began understanding Atticus Ann's plan. "Yes," Addison Ann said with a beaming smile on her face, so glad that Atticus Aries finally understood. "We must look up and ahead, not down and behind, to find our way through the wood." Atticus Aries ran to his desk as quick as a flash. He started opening drawers, pulling out feathers, stones, hooks, and fishing line, all from his stash. "Hurry up, Addison Ann," Atticus Aries beckoned. "Grab all your supplies. Let's set up a workstation." And do you know what? Addison Ann, she did. And for the first time in months, Atticus Aries and Addison Ann worked together again. They had once again found their childhood bliss. They laughed, they joked, they acted silly. They remembered how to be a kid. Through the months of February, March, and April, winter continued to linger on. But Atticus Aries and Addison Ann kept working diligently on the wind chime that would lead them to the meadow and the pond. Then when the month of May rolled around, there were so many changes that Mother Nature unbound. For starters, there were no longer leaves and snow all over the ground. The sky seemed bluer, the sun began shining brighter, and there wasn't nearly as much rain. The grass, the trees, the flowers were all coming into bloom again. And what happens, you may ask, when the flowers begin to bloom? The butterflies and hummingbirds return and once again begin to zoom. So Atticus Aries and Addison Ann sat down the path to have a picnic at the creek and to catch crawdads and to play. It was a beautiful morning in mid-May. And wouldn't you know it, as Addison Ann sat by the creek, allowing herself to be bathed in the warm sunlight, something quickly darted into her frame of sight. It was a hummingbird, which seemed to be hovering in mid-flight. "Atticus Aries!" Addison Ann called as she sprung to her toes, for she knew that her patience had finally paid off as she hollered, "Come on, Atticus Aries, we've got to go!" Atticus Aries sprung to action as quick as a whip. He took off up the path, following the hummingbird and Addison Ann, hoping that over his own feet he didn't trip. Atticus Aries charged forward. For once, he was following his heart's desire. He wasn't worried about the thick tree roots or even the briars. Instead of staying on the safe path, he was acting noble. He was acting strong. He was not acting cautious or shy. He was charging forward, looking only to the sky. Atticus Aries didn't let his fear of losing his path keep him from feeling so carefree. Even when he did trip and he skinned his knee, Atticus Aries simply brushed the dirt from his knee, and as he stood up from laying on the ground, it was then that he noticed Addison Ann was standing beside him, looking around, quite astounded. For what Mother Nature unveiled, as spring had once again sprung, left both Atticus Aries and Addison Ann feeling quite spellbound. They both looked around, their eyes sparkled with wonder and delight. Smiles turned up the corner of their lips, yet no words could be found. How was this possible, when just weeks ago to find their path through the forest seemed quite so improbable? Addison Ann's trumpet vine grew back larger and fuller than before, for some vines became intertwined with the limbs, making a canopy of flowers high in the trees, while others made a gorgeous and fragrant path spread out across the forest floor. And over Atticus Aries' stones, you would no longer stumble if you didn't watch your footing. They had sunken into the newly rain-soaked ground and made a path of wonderful footholds that helped guide their way without even looking. "You were right," they both found themselves saying to each other at exactly the same time. Then they both started laughing as they quickly both said, "Jinx," again at exactly the same time, almost like they were sharing the same mind. They laughed until their sides hurt and tears filled their eyes, but neither could believe what they were seeing with their own eyes. They felt like they had won a prize. "Atticus Aries, it's just like you said. All we had to do was wait for the changing of the season, and having a little bit of patience did carry us through. I'm so sorry I doubted you. You were right all along. Mother Nature rewarded our patience. We just had to ride out the storm. About that, you had no doubt. And over the winter, I learned a lot about myself that I may not have if Mother Nature had not given us this time out." And Addison Ann, I'm sorry that I doubted your plan from the start. I never dreamed that a vine could actually take off and be such a work of art. And not only that, I'm sorry that over the winter I was very cruel. I truly acted a fool. I wasn't a good brother or a good friend. I left you when you were so disappointed and sad. I ran away from you to keep myself from feeling so bad," Atticus Aries admitted as he looked at the ground. "Do you think I don't know that?" Addison Ann said, and then added, It's not like us to have such a spat. That's why I stopped talking about the meadow and just gave you your space. I could see that talking about how much I missed the meadow only brought a look of sadness and disappointment to your face. Addison Ann finished as she wiped a tear from her eye. Then, right in front of them, the hummingbird darted across the sky. So off Atticus Aries and Addison Ann ran as quick as a whip. For they knew if they were going to follow the hummingbird, they had to be quick. They darted and weaved through the forest, following the hummingbird that did zoom. They leaped over the fallen tree limbs and dodged the thick tree roots, all while not trampling the flowers in bloom. If either Atticus Aries or Addison Ann did trip, the one caught the other and steadied them, so they were on their way without missing a step. Up one final hill, Atticus Aries and Addison Ann ran. They were so tired from running at such a pace. But did they stop? No, not Atticus Aries and Addison Ann. When they arrived at the top of the hill, the trees opened up, and they caught a view of the meadow lying down below. Everything looked so alive and different than it did the last time they were there, just a few months ago. The hummingbird took off straight for the pond, with Atticus Aries and Addison Ann following closely behind. They both stumbled a few times as the steep incline they did race, but their vision was clear, and towards the pond they both beelined. Oh, how they laughed. Oh, how they played. They ran, they leaped, they twirled. They did all the things that had been missing and longing for months. And as always is the case, as they laid under the tree resting, the daylight hours began growing thin. And as Atticus Aries and Addison Ann lay there talking, the wind chimes became the topic of conversation again. "Do you think we should try to hang them all tomorrow?" Addison Ann asked. Atticus Aries quickly replied, "No, we can't do that. Not all in one day. The task is simply too vast." "You are right, Atticus Aries, and it's also a task that we don't want to rush." They both laid there in silence for a moment, thinking of the best way to handle the hanging of the wind chimes, in almost a hush. After a moment, Addison Ann added, "If we want the wind chimes to remain our beacon, then we must hang them, each one with care, so that they can weather any season. And if at any point," Atticus Aries added, "we notice a wind chime is getting tattered, we must take it down and repair it right away. It will never be a task we will put off for another day." Both Atticus Aries and Addison Ann did agree that keeping their pathway clear was crucial. They knew they had to make sure that their path's passage never again needed Mother Nature's approval. They got up from the newly awakened lush spring grass to head back towards home as the sun began dropping lower in the sky. And for once, neither Atticus Aries nor Addison Ann worried about being able to return to the meadow the following day, for they knew they would never again to this place have to say goodbye. The end.